if you have any good coach and you ask a question expecting a very specific kind of answer, any good coach that I know of would easily say, or they should say, like, it depends, right?
Welcome to State of Health Podcast. This is your host, J-Mart. On this podcast, I will share my knowledge and experience as a personal trainer and health coach, and talk about my interests and experiments in physical training, nutrition, and other lifestyle factors involved in health. On this episode of the podcast, I am joined by Ian MacLeod, also known as stoicmobility on Instagram. After hearing my State of Health podcast episode with Wes Hendricks, Ian reached out to have a conversation about health span and longevity. As a 16-year veteran in the fitness industry, including opening his own world-class training facility, Nirvana Strength in Bali, Ian has a lot of insight on how to take a holistic approach to training with the goal of longevity. A key insight shared by Ian was to think of your health and longevity goals in the same way as your competition or performance goals. Have a target in mind of what you want your health to look like and break it down to individual achievable steps to work toward. We also discussed injuries and how to mitigate them, how Ian himself keeps his body mostly pain-free. We talked about the importance of cultivating a deep sense of awareness of your body and the need for an additional outside perspective on your movement quality from a coach's eye. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think you will get many useful tips about your personal health journey by listening in. If you like this podcast and want to hear more from me, then head over to jmartfit.substack.com and hit subscribe. By the way, if you'd really like to help out, please rate the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or hit like if you're watching on YouTube. And of course, sharing with someone else who might enjoy listening also goes a long way. Okay, no further delays, let's listen in. Hello friends and fam, this is J-Mart, and we've got another episode of State of Health. And our special guest today is Ian MacLeod, also known as stoicmobility on Instagram. Ian, welcome to State of Health. Thank you for asking to come on.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to having this conversation with you. And even just the title of your podcast, I really like. I think the state of health is a very important topic that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's discuss it. So maybe before I guess we do that, let's give the listeners a little bit of a background about you. Would you mind just kind of talking a little bit about your the time you spend in the fitness industry? I think you mentioned you've been in the industry for 16 years, so give us like a brief description of what that 16 years been like.
Yeah, plus or minus, I'm originally from the USA, and so we're really big into team sports. So I've been playing, like, for example, American football for quite a long time, from middle school all the way through university days. And during that time, it was all about bigger, stronger, faster. So it's just about explosiveness, power, and just getting really strong. But I was also very lacking in kind of my flexibility and mobility during that time. Um, and then it shifts over into, continue coaching in the football world, and start shifting into more body composition training. So what your typical personal trainer would do. Then from there, just did a little bit of CrossFit stuff. Um,
Did you
Eventually
ever
started
do any
progressing.
body composition, bodybuilding competitions?
Yeah, so I did one as an experience, to kind of see what that whole process is like. That got me down to like my lowest weight that I had been basically since middle school. I was about 76 kgs. So I don't remember what that is in pounds, but yeah, I was really lean because my
Mm-hmm.
university days I was at my heaviest at about 110 kilos. And so just a kind of vast difference between the two.
Mm-hmm. It's like
But yeah, so
165, 170 pounds.
yeah, yeah. So then, yeah, after that, I started shifting towards gymnastic strength training and calisthenics. Then combining that with getting into mobility and flexibility training. You know, I worked at a PT studio and managed that for a little while, but then for the last 6 years, I opened and founded a gym in Bali called Nirvana Strength. Um, I thought it was a great facility, and the aim was basically to create a space and an environment that helped people with their transition. And that's one of the big things that we'll probably talk about with regards to kind of the behavioral side and having a good environment support system that actually helps support bigger transitions in life.
Mm-hmm.
Then now, actually, very recently, I've started shifting away from the having the actual brick and mortar. I'm no longer over there at Nirvana Strength. Just really focusing on doing international workshops and uh, trying to actually go out and get to people as opposed to waiting for them to come all the way out to Bali.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very cool. Thank you for that summary. And so many things to jump off on. But that last thing you said, so that you're doing these workshops. Could you tell us like what is the aim of these workshops? I know one of the things you were talking to me about in the email is about turning fitness professionals more health oriented, more into health coaches. Is that part of kind of like the focus of what these workshops are about?
Yeah, it's well with regards to like whatever their particular interests are. So like yesterday, I did a small like 90-minute kind of pop up class here in Istanbul, and the entire audience are yogis or yoga practitioners. So they're not necessarily, you know, in their world, they're not really talking with like clients on a one-to-one basis. Typically, it's more of a group class kind of thing, and yoga in itself can be an entire, you know, lifestyle, and there's a philosophy to it, depending on, you know, which style of yoga you participate in and who your teachers are. Like you might go certain paths, but yeah, there is generally a very holistic approach to health in the yoga world, which that idea of like holistic practices, I think everybody should kind of go down that route when they're thinking about health, wellness, longevity, um, because you know there every aspect of your daily life is going to have an impact on you know how your training is, how you're feeling, everything for me on the on both the physical side, you know, even mental side, really, I think everything kind of falls under stress management. Um, so if we're understanding like the basic idea of like how the body works, you know, the more you stress the body in a positive way, you provide opportunities to adapt and get stronger. So, you know, taking that idea and that concept, you can apply it to a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you're personalizing the workshops to whatever the
Yeah,
interests of the
ideally.
people are. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's important. Like, right, we do that for our clients when we're training them one on one based on their goals. That makes sense to apply that on a workshop level as well.
Yeah, so most of the workshops tend to be focused on a combination of integrative mobility, active flexibility, and handstands.
Mm-hmm.
All the training that I do with my clients is essentially range-based strength training.
Mm-hmm.
So I look at flexibility as being that end range, both short and long positioning, strength training, the integrated mobility work as more joint orientated strength training.
Mm-hmm.
And that would typically what you would find mostly in like rehabilitation kind of exercises.
Mm-hmm.
And then full range, like strength or muscular training.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think those things are really important, and I found it to be a very nice approach.
Mm-hmm.
And then with regards to longevity, you know, there's in the industry as a whole, there's a lot of focus on cardiovascular health and muscle mass as you know very important components to staying healthy in the long term, which they are. I'm not saying that they're not, but I do think that you know other issues that we tend to have growing up as we get older are like joint issues. So you have like a connective tissue issue at the joints,
Yeah, damage.
range of motion problems as far as quality life goes.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what is the typical way that people get injured. So in exercise and weight training, we see a lot of injuries in the lengthened position of the muscle or of a movement, the eccentric phase of a movement,
Mhm.
under too much load or intensity. So
Mhm.
either they just don't have the range, or they just the weight or whatever intensity they're using is too great for the range that they're working.
Mhm.
And so I do find that with regards to longevity, there is one side of like improving performance, which I think is very important, but also we need to work on mitigating the risk and possibility of injury. And I think if you take a very proactive performance kind of emphasized approach to that side as well, um, yeah, it's better for the long term of the individual.
So you're talking about taking almost like a competitive approach to improving your longevity. Is that kind of the idea you're talking about? Or
Yeah,
did
I
I?
think so. I think that's a good way to think about it.
So how
There's
would
a
you do that?
few. Um, so so like like if you think about it in a sense that we're constantly trying to improve ourselves to become a better version of ourselves. So if you look at it the other way with regards to like, okay, in the future, there's like this person that I should be.
Mm.
And let's say theoretically anything less than that, so where I am now is a lesser version, or possibly even an injured version of my optimal self. Um, and so when I think about training, a lot of us, especially when we're thinking about being at a competitive level, um, when athletes are in the off season and they're performing their training regimen, um, they're not looking to injure themselves. And typically most athletes only injure themselves during highly competitive situations where they're being asked to perform at 100% or even like beyond what they would normally do in their training sessions. So in those situations, the risk is very high because the the intensity and everything that they're performing are at incredibly high levels.
High forces
But they're
colliding too.
Yeah, but they're not doing that every single day, year round. Um, if you look at it from a perhaps a an Olympic athlete like training perspective versus a sports athlete perspective, um, Olympic athletes, typically there's not a large population of them that coaches can pull
Mhm.
from, and the preparation is over quite a few years, let's say minimally at least four, but some of them are obviously preparing for 8, 12, 20 years, whatever, versus a sports athlete where it's like if you're not performing now, you're going to automatically be replaced by somebody else. So, they're a lot of times are expected to train and try to perform even through massive levels of like discomforts and injuries. So there's a lot of self-sacrifice to perform, because the competition is so high, on a physical level, but also because there's so many people trying to get into that world. But in the normal world where there's no sports and just me as an individual, I can't run my body into the ground because I can't just replace parts like if it was a car.
Yeah.
Um, like I'm gonna have to live with these parts for the rest of my life. And there is a when you think about we have to think about the long term, right?
Mhm.
I think this when it goes back to like let's say having proper technique, especially for really heavy like loads or weight, is that um, it's this idea of accumulation, right? Where it's you may be able to get away with relatively bad technique when we're young and we're highly adaptable and we can recover from things very easily. But if you do that over, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, at some point, um, it's going to be the straw that broke the camel's back kind of situation where you just keep accumulating bad reps over that long period of time, and then just one day you're going to do something where it just like maybe your back gives out or your knee gives out. And if someone does play like a competitive sport, maybe not at a professional level, but are active in that manner, I would encourage them to even look at what are the typical injuries that are experienced playing that sport or that activity, and not just accepting them as parts of normal things to expect as far as participating in that sport. It's those, consider them as being normal or highly probable injuries that may come along with the sport. But what are the things that you're doing to mitigate the possibility of that happening to you? I
Hmm.
think those are taking that proactive approach is, I think, is really quite important.
Absolutely. That should definitely be one of the major goals of the supplementary training that you're doing for the like the activity that or sports, whatever you're performing. Let's say just a regular person. I always recommend for, I think, ultimate fulfillment and for consistency and for actually sticking to something, you find an activity that you enjoy doing. That could be a team sport, that could be a martial art, that could be a solo sport, whatever it is, and you enjoy doing that. That's your why, that's your fun activity that you do. But then, like you said, when you do that, there's a lot of repetitive movement that could lead to injury. And so the additional training, you should have an additional movement practice. I like to call it a daily movement practice that supports that fun activity that you do, and making sure that you're doing the things you were talking about in your workshops, like active mobility, end range flexibility. All these things are going to be so vital for making sure that the connective tissue is ready and resilient to meet the high demand in the sport, like you were talking about. That's the greatest opportunity for injury to occur when you're putting your body through these maximal intensity situations. And I like the idea that you talked about for having this image of what you're building up to, right? Like you said, like that's what they do for Olympic training. They have a 4, 8, maybe 12-year cycle of what they think the ultimate peak that they're going to get to at the end of this
Yeah.
cycle, and they build up to it year by year, cycle by cycle. You could apply that same thing for longevity. You could imagine yourself maybe as an 80-year-old, 70-year-old. You could have some sort of idea for each decade, maybe 50, 60, 70,
Yeah.
80, and certain skills or activities that you want to be able to maintain for each of those age groups or age categories. And what would be the things that you would have to be able to do now in order to maintain that ability into those late decades. I really love that idea of kind of planning for the future and then working back and kind of breaking it down into smaller goals and then working up towards that.
Yeah, I think that when we think about, even let's say, the idea of setting these goals, um, there's certain normalized expectations as to what a 60-year-old should be able to do or an 80-year-old should be able to do. Even when you go to the doctors, let's say you get to being, there's obviously certain age brackets they're going to kind of compare your results to. But I always found it a little bit odd that, though we've, in this kind of modern time, we've been able to expand our lifespan, the health span, the quality of our life during that time period hasn't really improved very much or very well. So, I would encourage people to even kind of rethink the idea of like, oh, my doctor says I'm healthy for my age group. Why not actually try to make it so that you're healthy, you're so healthy
Period.
that you should actually be healthy for, 20-year-old when you're like 60. They've got some interesting tests out there that people can take with regards to like seeing how quickly their body is aging. There's like these like cell testing kits that you can get, and then there's
Mm-hmm.
also, yeah, even the idea of like, what is your, maybe you're 40 years old, as far as like your actual age, but you can actually see like what the age of your cells are, and like kind of compare, what's the actual health age of your body.
Mm-hmm. Those are cool. I also like doing the actual like strength tests, or even some simple ones like the sit down sit up test. You know that one where
Yeah.
if you can sit down without touching the ground with your hands and knees, and then stand back up in a similar way without needing to touch the ground with hands and knees, then you get like a
Yeah.
perfect score out of 10. And the people who can score a 10 have a much higher like likelihood to increase their lifespan as opposed to normal. I don't remember the exact details of what the statistics are actually, but like that was a really important test that you could do. But also grip strength is highly associated with longevity as well. So like just being able to do like a 1 to 2 minute dead hang, like that's a really good test for for longevity. Can you do that? Because if you can't, then that's an easy thing to start working towards.
Yeah. And yeah, and with regards to like training, mobility, flexibility, work, I always get asked a lot, like, how much do I actually need? How flexible do I need to be? And most people, it's, not really that much. What I always like to tell people is always obviously relative to what activities you want to participate in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's let's say if you have a particular activity that doesn't actually require a large range of motion, you need enough flexibility to be able to perform the movements necessary for your activity, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is a given. But with regards to injury mitigation, we'd actually want a surplus because we want to be able to account for the unexpected. And so anybody who's ever played competitive sports or has to try to perform a movement at, 100% maximal, they do understand that the risk of something going wrong is actually quite high.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just whenever you're performing simple movements under high intensity, that's where obviously you have injury risk. So you'll see Olympic athletes that obviously they've been practicing these two movements for multiple years, and in a competition they may something may go wrong, and maybe they overshoot on like a snatch with the weight, and the weight ends up kind of getting behind them. You have examples of either you completely miss the weight or the lift, or you try to save it at that top position, and in doing so, you either are successful but you injure yourself, or you're unsuccessful and you injure yourself. Or probably the best state would be like you are successful in correcting for that mistake and you're completely fine. And even for like a normal person, if I think of like, you're walking in the streets and you turn your ankle, which is a very common thing to do. Um, I've there was a CrossFit level 3 coach that I knew, and he missed one step, and he blew out his ankle, tore everything. And the idea of that kind of situation is that the body is just not properly prepared to handle the challenge that life kind of presented him. Um,
Mm-hmm. And that
so
last case scenario where you're describing them like correcting and not being injured, that's not going to happen by accident. You have to have built up the range, that extra range, and the capacity to take on extra load in that extra range for that option to present itself. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen.
yeah, for sure. And I think for the average person that doesn't play competitive sports or doesn't do sports at all, and maybe they just want to do the fitness part to just help ensure a greater health span and the longevity of their life, the challenges that we inherently face are just things from our daily life. You know, right now I'm walking through quite a lot of cities in Europe and now in Turkey, but even trying to dodge like people riding bicycles, like that kind of thing, or it's like slippery outside, because it's been raining, and one of the kind of analogies that I would give some people is like, let's say you're, walking in a supermarket and, you slip on a banana and life forces you to do a split. Um, these kind of like daily life kind of injuries are
Yeah.
much more common.
Getting
Um,
up and out of a toilet, like down and up, like that's a
yeah,
common thing for people that, they
yeah,
struggle with, and it could be a place where like something goes wrong, an injury occurs.
right.
Yeah,
So
that's why we
the
squat.
train, yeah, and the training. So the training that we do is what should inherently prepare us for the challenge, the unexpected challenges of life. Um, and those things are, we don't really think about perfect technique when we're trying to like, try to pick up our kids or, playing with our dog. There's going to be a lot of things that we don't really think about in the moment of thinking of that kind of situation. But if we tweak our back, then these are also things to consider with regards to like how you respond to these things. Because in America, it's very common. We're obviously very big into the opioids and into taking pills, and we're kind of notorious for that. And we're really big into pain mitigation or pain management through just dealing with like the symptoms,
Pharmaceuticals.
right? Yeah, it's a lot of pill popping, and um, I think there's a lot that can be done from a holistic perspective to kind of help work on those problems.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the medical industry is kind of built around essentially waiting until after the fact that you're injured, so it's not very
Mm-hmm.
preventative in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And also, it's very geared towards acute problems and dealing with
Mm-hmm.
just pain management, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to actually working with the body to try and correct itself. So I think fitness professionals, like with regards to helping, like from a pain management, stress management perspective, and health coaching, could be very helpful because a lot of us are very much on the front lines dealing with clients on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like what you said there. We are the frontline people who interface with the community and kind of see what their body is doing day to day. And it doesn't, most often it doesn't happen overnight that someone is so bad that they don't need to go see a doctor, right? It's an accumulation of things going wrong and if that person is seeing a health coach, then perhaps that person can intervene and prevent that from getting worse to the point where they do need to go see a medical doctor and get some prescription for pharmaceuticals to deal with just the symptoms rather than fixing the root of the problem. I did want to go back to one point you made earlier and give you a little bit of pushback. Let me know what you think. You were talking about having bad technique and ultimately, like with repeated bad reps, you can accumulate to a point where you can have like that last straw that broke the camel's back. I've been kind of really thinking about this a lot recently and wondering whether really ultimately it's load and frequency that matter more than technique. Um, because you already said it, human beings are amazing and we can adapt. And yes, perhaps into later like adulthood, our adaptation is not quite as robust, but it's still one of the key features of having a human body is that whatever stimulus we provide it, we do adapt. So is it that you're doing bad technique over a long period of time and adding up bad reps, or is it that your load is the wrong load and your frequency is too high?
I think there's a combination of those things. Yeah, there's a lot of nuances into all these kind of components, and
Mm-hmm.
so um, there's if we think some usually like technique for me, it also there's a lot of benefit in actually training. Okay, so for example, there's in how the body works with the immune system, right? Is your immune system gets stronger as you get sick, and so
Mm-hmm.
there is a concept that like it's like the idea of like taking the flu shot. Is like you purposefully
Mm-hmm.
give yourself the flu so that
Mm-hmm.
a smaller version of it, so that you can kind of
Mm-hmm.
get stronger and improve. So you don't you kind
Mm-hmm.
of protect yourself um,
Mm-hmm.
from getting the flu. So there could be an argument to some very small degree with regards to purposeful use of like some kind of toxin that you might be in your environment or something along those lines to kind
Mm-hmm.
of help build your some adaptation to it so that you
Right.
can
The
kind of
hormetic effect,
um,
right? Like your body
yeah.
just responds stronger.
Um, and so, yeah, you have to be obviously very careful with regards to like saying things as far as like, let's say there is positive benefit to actually training movements with quote unquote bad technique. Or because the idea is that let's say there is the possibility of something going wrong, and usually the when you go wrong in a particular movement or a technique, so let's say you're
Hmm.
doing a really heavy squat and you don't go into a perfect technical movement, and maybe you shift a little bit to the right or left, or maybe your background's a little bit like these are all going to be simple things that happen, but the problem that ends up happening is that it's generally under a really high load. Usually, when you
Hmm.
see the body start kind of compensating and collapsing, but the positions that we get injured in are in um, generally positions that we're not used to training.
Hmm.
And so I would say that there's actually a lot of benefit to being able to handle the frequency and loads at these really odd positions.
Hmm.
Um, but it just needs to be done in a very controlled and safe manner.
Yeah.
So
Very
with regards to the,
mindful.
yeah, very mindful in how you work them. Um, because at the end of the day, I don't believe that there's inherently anything that would be considered a good movement or bad movement so
Exactly.
much as it's really relative to your the individual's tissues capacity to handle that movement.
Hmm.
And that's really all I would say with regards to like what's good or bad. Um, there are some, obviously some things like on a technical level where it can be quite extreme in one direction. You're like, there's that's really bad. So there's always extremes.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's somewhere for sure, somewhere in the middle, and the details of what you're trying to perform is important. And I think technique is, yeah, it's more specific to like, are you able to get maximal performance out of what it is you're trying to do? Um, I think, there's smaller technical details that go into like how would you properly teach a squat or a deadlift. I'm sure there's a lot of different coaches in those realms that would have some difference of opinion. But there are some general foundational stuff that they would all agree upon.
Hmm.
And I think those are the parts that need to be focused on as far as having good technique. And then when it gets into the nuances where you can kind of play around with it as far as who you're working with.
Yeah. That I think what you said makes total sense. Obviously, there's certain common things that like humans are all unique, but we also have like similar things about us, right? You can just like be like you have we have two legs, two arms, like the
Yeah,
anatomy is
yeah.
kind of similar, right? So there's
Foundations there.
some
Yeah.
things, yes, some things that are foundational that you can help teach to get the most out of the activity, like you said. But at the same time, like if you just do a little bit of lifting and never actually try to maximize the load that you're lifting, but you're consistent with your lifting, even if you have bad technique, you're never actually going to hurt yourself, right? And if you're consistent
Yeah.
and you're consistently lifting, then maybe you're getting the benefits of actually doing the consistent lifting with bad technique. And then you actually have really good longevity because you never dared to pick up a really heavy weight that could have caused you to have such a bad injury that you stopped completely.
Yeah, I mean, even there's always a degree to everything that we say, and if you have any good coach and you ask a question expecting a very specific kind of answer, any good coach that I know of would easily say, or they should say, like it depends, right?
It depends. It
I don't
depends.
want to, yeah, I don't want to say that it's like bad technique is not gonna do you any harm. Um, for me, again, it goes to that accumulation, right? So even if it's a relatively light weight, like so, for example, we have a really big problem, I think, now in modern society where we have a lot of thoracic flexion and rounding of the shoulders, and we're kind of really
Hmm.
stuck in this position.
Hmm.
This doesn't happen, over a short period of time. Like it's our daily life, right? Almost everything is kind of mimicking that same position, from being in the car, sitting in chairs, when we lie down in bed. We don't really do much with regards to thoracic extension and, you know, let's say training the back and, working on overhead shoulder flexion. These are very common things. And the point you can live your life with a very, hunched back. Um, for many of us, it's not necessarily going to, necessarily take away from a lot with regards to
Hmm.
quality of life.
Hmm.
But for most people, like from a postural perspective, I definitely think long term from a pain management perspective, like there's going to be issues. It's just kind of
Hmm.
like when it's going to kind of show itself, not if.
Right, right.
Um,
But bad posture and doing an exercise with quote unquote incorrect technique are a little bit different, right? Like one is like a chronic position that you're stuck in. The other one is a movement with, let's say, inefficient
well, yeah, I mean, but if you're in a but if you're chronically stuck in a particular position, so you don't have any thoracic extension, and you have a lot of, rounding the shoulders and a lot of thoracic flexion, performing a back squat with good technique is pretty much impossible.
Fair
Um,
point.
so there's always going to be some overlap. The things that we do in our daily life are going to spill into our training. So um, you know, it's it's like why do athletes practice? Like, and how you perform in practice is going to affect how you are in competition. So you can also think of like how you act and behave in your daily life is going to actually affect how you train. Um, I think bringing more mindfulness into your daily activities, I think can be highly beneficial to how you train.
Hmm. How, what is your suggestion to clients or even during workshops for how to do that, how to be more mindful and how to incorporate that into the things like physical activity?
Yeah, so you know, when you're training, it's a much better opportunity to be aware of like what areas you might be tight, what areas you might be weak, what what movements you're kind of lacking access to.
Hmm.
Um, One of the big things in training that, especially when it comes to both strength and flexibility work, is as you get closer and closer to whatever your maximal capacity is to perform, the body naturally wants to find the easiest way of performing the movement. And easiest doesn't necessarily mean with the best of technique. It will always find a way to compensate. So
Yeah.
let's say
Path
for
of least
strength work,
resistance.
yeah, exactly. And so with strength work, it's gonna, try to access the muscles that are stronger, or it's going to, try to adjust the limbs in a way that it thinks will provide more output. Um, and so really putting a really big focus on trying to be aware of how your body's trying to compensate and
Hmm.
at what intensities and what positions.
Hmm.
Because these are all, it's giving you a lot of information that allows you to make adjustments to your training regimen. Um, and so with regards to like things like flexibility, it's, you know, you're, generally your body doesn't really understand why you're trying to do anything. It just knows that for some reason you're trying to perform a movement or an action, and it's deemed necessary for some reason. Um, and so as you get deeper into some flexibility kind of positions, you'll naturally see the body try to go the path of least resistance. But it doesn't work on necessarily the areas that you'd like to focus on. So if you're trying to get a proper, let's say, a forward fold,
Hmm.
so a forward fold, you're trying to touch your toes, your body will go the path of least resistance, but you might, if the focus or the reason for doing a forward fold is actually to stretch your hamstrings, um, you might work on your forward fold, but that doesn't mean your hamstrings are getting worked. Um, and so understand like what it is you're trying to accomplish, being aware of how your body is trying to compensate, and
Mm-hmm.
know if the reality of what you're doing is actually matching what your intention is. If you apply this to your daily life, I generally would encourage people like on a very small scale, it's like maybe every 15 minutes, bring attention to like how you're sitting, you know, throughout the course of the day, particularly as you start getting fatigued, your body will start to shift into positions that just, feel more comfortable or don't take as much energy to maintain. So, obviously, like if you're always constantly leaning over a desk because of the body positioning that we're in, and let's say gravity is pulling us down, your body's naturally going to want to start slumping over because it's just easier to hold that position. Um, and it doesn't require as much strength as maintaining a upright posture.
Mm-hmm.
So the first step is always just trying to bring awareness back into what your body positioning is. What I mean, let's say for example, like if you're working on someone with regards to nutrition, the first thing you would ask them to do is just like, let's bring attention back to like what are you actually eating the whole day. So you would just
Yeah,
take
food
note of
diary.
everything that you're consuming every single day. And because people's memories are not the best, right? They will forget the one or two scoops of, peanut butter that they just didn't even think about eating. And so just bringing attention back to like what it is they're doing. This is a good technique with regards to like, let's say eating slower is, bringing attention back to the food as opposed to like
Chewing.
watching the TV and screen. Yeah, chewing. I do find that a lot of the best things for the average person are very simple, very
Mm-hmm.
just being more mindful, things that don't
Mm-hmm.
actually cost a lot of money. It's just requires a little bit more attention and focus.
Yeah. I like what you said. I do a lot of the same things. And one thing I like to bring awareness to is the breath as well, right? I'm a big proponent of incorporating breathing exercises, daily breathing exercises, and then just having those moments of mindfulness where you just bring awareness back to your breath for 1 or 2 cycles and really, like you're talking about, feeling out what your body position is, but just through the breathing, whether you're able to like expand your rib cage as fully as possible, really breathing in through the nose, exhaling through the mouth, and paying attention to all these components. I think that's an important and very effective way of cultivating awareness and um, mindfulness. Another thing is just like what you were talking about is applying that through when you're doing stretching. When you're just kind of doing these even like very basic global stretches where you're just kind of moving into a position and coming out and really paying attention to what your body feels and what it's telling you. I really like to use stretching as an assessment tool to learn what my body's going through. Sometimes you don't really know if something's tight or stiff until you get into a certain position. So it's important to, go in and go out of all these different positions that your body can get into to have an idea of where you're at. And, you don't need a lot of time in each position to have an understanding of whether you're good there or whether, something needs a little bit more attention and more work. And then another thing that kind of struck me as you were talking is really for developing that proprioceptive sense, right? Like that idea of like where your body is in space. I really like balance, single leg balance exercises, even just like, yeah, just balancing on one leg and then taking that to the next level by practicing with your eyes closed. That I think is a very, very, very good method of developing that.
Yeah, and yeah, I do think like I really like working on a lot of full range body weight exercises or just full range movements with regard to strength training that incorporate stabilizing component. So like these balance kind of things, or single leg movements, or just unilateral movements, I think are really good, because there's a lot of use of machines in the fitness world right now, which really geared around like there's one singular like movement pattern that's basically being worked. um, Obviously you can change that up quite a bit if you understand what you're doing and how to adjust the machines properly. But typically, machines tend to kind of box us into just one kind of movement pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that though we can look to gain greater levels of muscle mass to help protect the body from injury, we end up building that muscle mass without building up the corresponding like strength in the tendons and ligaments and our stabilizers. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that tends to be kind of where the bigger issue is. Um, if you're able to kind of find movements where you're able to combine those parts, building up the joint health, the stabilizers, as well as building up the muscles that you're working, I find for the average person that's going to be more beneficial in the long term. Um, yeah, it is
100%.
always, yeah.
And it applies to
Um,
all sorts of training too. So one little anecdote I'll tell you is the first time I tried running a marathon, I trained pretty hard for it, and I got my cardiovascular system to be quite capable of being able to run the marathon. But I didn't
yeah.
have enough time to prepare, so my tissue composition was not nowhere near close to being able to actually do it. So
Mhm.
I had a couple of soft tissue injuries, knee and ankle. I couldn't actually finish the race. I did three-quarters of it, but I had to stop because I was doing too much damage.
Mhm.
And yeah, that can apply both for like lifting heavy weights and for like doing long distance running.
Right. Yes, it's the long distance thing. I've never personally been a big fan of doing long distance running. I'm not a long distance kind of guy, um, but yeah, being able to, and I think it's like setting proper expectations for the individual and like what the actual like preparation is, because there are some people that are just like, they'll be inactive for a very long period of time and then just think they can just go up and run let's say even a 10K. um I think that with endurance activities, same with like strength activities, and also on the flexibility side is really understanding like how to build your body up so that it has the capacity to really perform at those more kind of intense levels. And the idea of like what's intense or not, or what's extreme or not, is always going to be relative to the individual and what you're able to do and perform.
Training
So I
history.
have, yeah, for sure. And even though there's a lot of things that I was able to do in my younger days, I can still feel like I have the confidence that I could do that, but I do need to also realize that I haven't been training in that manner for such a long period of time. I can't just expect to, get back underneath the bench press and hit the high weights that I used to when I was
Hmm.
younger. I'm just a different person than I was at that point.
Right. And it kind of comes back to what we were talking about, right? Even if you had perfect technique, it's just the wrong load and the wrong frequency to be able to try to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I can, and so that's where you can, have there's an idea in Olympic weightlifting, that I got from my one of my coaches. He used to be on the national team for China, and the idea of having a daily max. So I think a lot of people do their programming based off of what their all-time one rep max is, but they have a concept of like training based off a percentage of what your daily max would be for that particular day. And that the idea and concept around that is that let's say you didn't get good sleep and you're supposed to be training at 70% of whatever your maximal is. um, it's that 70% at that moment in time because you're not well rested, and maybe you're more stressed than usual, or whatever things are happening in your life, that 70% is actually now like 90%. You're training with a fatigued body, and now your risk of injury is actually really quite high. I think there's this, being able to understand that though you may have a great plan set, and a structure that you want to follow, there's still the daily individualization that needs to be, like, adjustments that need to be happening relative to like what's been happening in your life. Because yeah, if you for some reason you just haven't slept for 2 days, you can't really expect to be able to perform even at 70% with really good quality, for an extended period of time, because your body's just not going to be able to handle it. Um, so it's like setting proper expectations on how you feel, and that goes back to the awareness part, right? It's like, how are you feeling during your warm-ups?
Mm-hmm.
Does it feel like it's going to be a good day? And unfortunately for people that, well, not unfortunate, but it's more with regard, it's going to go back to your training experience. Do
Mm-hmm.
you actually know how to read the signals and the sign,
Mm.
and know the signs well enough to interpret in a way and make the proper adjustment in your program? Most beginners are not going to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, if you're training for longevity, then it's important to think about the long term and how, if you want to build up this sensibility and ability to tell how your body is feeling. So if it's going to be a long term thing, like from now till the rest of your life, then just take it easy, take it slow, work your way up in a way that's sustainable. Progressively overload. That's still very important. You need to slowly increase the intensity, but it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be a jump from 0 to 100 in like a week, right?
No, I mean, strength adaptations happen quite fast. Um, I think, though, the thing that people don't realize in that process is that the adaptations in the tendons and ligaments just take longer.
Mm,
And you do find that when a lot of people are dealing with like tendonitis issues, that there's some imbalance there that needs to be addressed.
mm-hmm.
Um,
This was actually a
and
case with a friend of mine recently. He's,
yeah,
funny guy. He's trying to learn, not learn, trying to get strong enough to do single arm pull up. And of course, without like giving himself enough time to like actually like develop enough strength to even be able to do enough like two arm pull ups with like added weight, he just moved on to single arm like negatives and then had a bicep tendonitis. It's
yeah.
like, okay, well, that could have been predicted.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite easy to see in certain regards, because, obviously once you go from two arms to one arm, you basically doubled the amount of weight that you're performing. And also, too, the movement
It's like
pattern
more
is
than
just
double.
not, yeah, the movement pattern is just not the same. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's that, and yeah, that's what I was saying with regards to like the actions, or the particular parts of the movement that people get more, are more susceptible to injury, is through eccentric phase.
Mm-hmm.
You have a high intensity, or high load, and you're progressively getting weaker as you shift more towards that lengthened state of
Mm-hmm.
the muscle, typically. And then, or you are in that lengthened position with a really high, intensity. And
Mm-hmm.
the small nuance to that, it's like high intensity relative to, um, your body's ability to perform. So if you're on your last set, and this is why like most people get hurt at the end of the training session as well, it's like you're highly fatigued. You're still trying to do something that you were doing when you're fresh.
Mm-hmm.
um, it's not gonna
And you're
work.
not adjusting.
Yeah, you're not adjusting. Yeah, yeah, it's a really good, yeah, good thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
And so yeah, you do find that, a lot of people tend to shy away from doing eccentrics. They shy away from doing, like really difficult isometric holds at like the end range positions. Um,
Those are
I
hard.
mean, one, they're very hard. Yeah, they're incredibly difficult. And it's not as dynamic. So I think maybe there's a component of like it's just not as fun.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Concentrics are fun, you know. Um, I think the dynamic part is it makes things exciting. It's not, yeah, it's not exciting to do, you know, like a 4 6 second negative,
Mm-hmm. But that's where the money
or
is. That's how you get stronger and build muscle.
it is. And they're really difficult. They're really hard. There's inherently a higher risk with performing those movements. Um, Isometrics more with regards to that lengthened position.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but and so this is where I mean having a trainer who knows what they're doing is very helpful because again they're looking to help you get as close to your maximal
Mm-hmm.
ability to perform, but minimizing and mitigating the possibility of a setback or injury.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay. And regressing and
yeah,
progressing the position in a way that's appropriate to you so that you do get to that maximum capacity that you specifically are capable of.
right. And yeah, it always brings up a funny image in my mind where you have, you know, someone trying to do bicep curls with an incredible amount of weight, and they have like three guys helping them do the bicep curls um, because just the weight is just way too much, and it's just like, well, it's not helping anybody. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's I mean, it's good for him to have the appropriate safety precautions around him. Maybe like the why those guys are there, which I would always encourage people to make sure they do, especially you know, things like back squats and things that where the weight is actually on top of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there's always a lot of like, you know, horror stories of things that happen.
There's endless
Better
gym fail
to
videos.
yeah. Always better to be properly prepared for the worst without you know having to need it
Mm-hmm.
versus you know being in a position where you need it and you just don't have it, and it doesn't really take much, right? Like even if you're only training back squats at like 60%, you know, if you were to tweak your hamstring in the process of performing the movement, is like
Mm-hmm.
that could be enough for, you know, where the weight then collapses on you. So I would always recommend like proper safety precautions no matter what your level of training experience is.
Oh yeah, for sure. Safety bars on your squat rack, everything.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen in yeah, my football days, I saw some pretty nasty injuries that were probably very unnecessary.
Mm-hmm. And did that like influence you in kind of how you progressed with your training and uh, like what you do for your own kind of personal um, fitness?
For sure. Yeah, as we kind of age and get older, my biggest number one is obviously is like relative to the activities that I want to be able to do is I don't want to be in pain. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to you know, though I had a lot of fun during my football days,
Mm-hmm.
just hitting people. You know, that stuff was fun and all, but it wasn't great like the day after, you know, where you're just
Mm-hmm.
like your body's just wrecked. Um,
Are you in pain
I
now?
no, everything's perfect. I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
best shape that I've been in, yeah, since I was, yeah, forever. You know, I'm able to, you know, I'm doing full handstands. I look at handstands as a nice like long term activity that I can do because it's
Mm-hmm.
very skill based activity, and um, it's actually really good with regards to offsetting um, the normal activities of the day with regards to like our shoulders and upper back because it requires a lot of shoulder flexion and thoracic extension.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I look at a particular skill and then I try to break it down into its components and see what the actual practical um, benefits of it are and how would it actually apply to other areas of my life, and then I try to train in that manner.
Mm-hmm.
So that along with doing full splits and back bending and those kind of things. Not only are those positions and those things are kind of cool to work, but from a very practical sense, you don't have to be able to do a full back bend or anything like that, but actually it's the components needed to, accomplish that that's actually really more important. So you can you can incorporate it in a way that it helps with no matter who you work with. Um, so
Mm-hmm.
that and then yeah, just like daily activity, active sports and hobby sports that I participate in from here and there,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, here and there, and then I'm looking to maybe do a big trek in Nepal next year.
Very
So that would
cool.
be like yeah, I think it's like 260 kilometers over like 15 days or something. Um,
Oh wow.
so
Okay.
that one you just start preparing for. Yeah.
Very cool. So, what do you attribute to like your feeling in the best shape of your life? Is it just the fact that you're working on your mobility so much and using all these components of being able to to express your body in like these ways as a way to assess how things are and kind of just staying on top of them? What is like the key thing here?
So yeah, just because I'm not in pain or discomfort right now doesn't mean that it doesn't come in and out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of there's a lot of in the fitness world. Sometimes you'll hear like people saying like, "Oh, bulletproof your shoulders." It's like you can do as much as you need to with regards to like mitigating the possibility of a injury or discomfort. But that doesn't mean that you won't get something like a small, discomfort here and there,
Mm-hmm.
depending on, the things you're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it'll always be this constant process of just bringing awareness back to the
Mm-hmm.
body. And as soon as you start feeling something, you know, try to deal with it as soon as you can get to it and not ignore it, right? Um, because if it's a small problem now, it's just only going to keep building because you're not addressing the issue.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to you want to try and do things that encourage the body to actually adapt and improve, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to there's a quick fix where someone is having knee discomfort. The first couple things they'll do is they'll obviously take some kind of like pain medication, but also too is that they will get like maybe a knee sleeve, and
Mm-hmm.
they'll just put the knee sleeve on and then compress the knee as they then continue on with their normal life, but they've never
Mm-hmm.
actually addressed the issue. Um,
Yeah,
so
just
it's
masked it.
always trying to figure out a way, yeah, figuring out a way so that you can actually address the issue instead of masking the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Now, these things are beneficial in, let's say, the short term. So, let's say you are in the process of addressing the issue, but you still need to be able to, do your other kind of training.
Mm-hmm.
Use the knee sleeve, use pain medication as tools to help you perform in the short term.
Mm-hmm.
But with regards to long term, is like you need to address the problem. And and I think that actually applies to every aspect of life. Is if you have a house and you got a leaky faucet, like you can tape it up for the short term, but it's like you need to deal with it because otherwise it's just going
Mm-hmm.
to end up being a bigger problem.
Mm-hmm. I love how you said it's just this ongoing process. There's no special magic thing, right? It's just constantly using your attention as a tool to direct your awareness towards your body with the goal in mind that your goal is that I want a long health span. I want to live for a long time, not feeling pain. If I am feeling pain, that's my signal. Okay, I need to look at this. I need to pay attention to it. That's the secret. There is no the problems arise when you start ignoring things, when you don't pay attention to your body, when there's signals coming in out left, right, and center, and you're just like ignoring everything and just sticking your head in the sand.
Yeah, and you find that it's actually really good to be able to, like, let's say, speak with someone who's, let's say, been a power lifter their whole life and now they're reaching their late 40s or 50s, or maybe they're in their 60s, maybe former bodybuilders that have been doing it for a really long time, and even using like the information of what kind of problems they have now, at their their age, and start working on ways to mitigate those at a younger stage. There I do find that there's a lot of people who, as they age and get older, they just get tighter and tighter and have more tension in the body, and all these things do is just restrict your capacity to move.
Mm-hmm.
And the more injuries you have, let's say, for example, like ankle injuries, ankle, like turning your ankle, spraining your ankle. Typically, for most people, that happens when the ankle gets into that inversion position, when
Mm-hmm.
there's just too much weight, right? It happens in a dynamic way. And
Yeah.
for people that have a history of turning their ankle, a lot of times their ankles will be very stiff, because that's the
Mm.
body's way of protecting itself, is to create that tension. Um, you can always improve joint mobility and range of motion, so you can work on your flexibility. But you always, this is a good thing that I wanted to say, was with regards to like working with the nervous system, is um, you have to, I think of the nervous system as an overprotective mother.
Mm.
um, when you're trying to do a particular movement and you injure yourself, is you basically end up getting restricted and pulled back into a more confined space as far as your
Mm-hmm.
body is concerned. And so it's kind of like your mom being like, all right, you went out and played with your friends, you got hurt, it's like you ain't going out again. You're coming
Go
back.
to your room.
um, yeah, go to your room, and it's like you're not leaving the house because I can't trust you. And that's the big thing, is like you have to build trust with the nervous system again,
Mm-hmm.
to essentially allow your mom to give you the freedom to be able to go back outside. And
Mm-hmm.
so you're working with your nervous system, you're working with these ranges, these intensities, and everything. But to allow the body to open up more and be able to express itself better, yeah, you have to work with the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you can try performing the movement, you can be doing it for years and just never see improvement. So there is some level of like you're not applying stress in the right manner.
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving your body the proper time to adapt and recover. Um, you know, it's the nervous system, particularly with regards to flexibility training, is really quite important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I say romance the nervous system, right? You can't just tell it what to do. You have to romance it
Yeah,
and
that's
kind
that's a
of
good one too. Yeah,
yeah, gently nudge it in the right direction. That's why I really love breathing exercises, right? You gotta do the really long exhales to activate that vagus nerve to put you in that calm, relaxed state, so you
yeah.
can actually fall into the positions that you're trying to get into.
Mm.
Cool, man. Well, this has been a great conversation about longevity and kind of things to think about as we are, every day getting a little bit older. And so maybe just to finish off the conversation, I'll give you my rubric or kind of formula for what I think constitutes health and what are the key things to focus on to, improve our longevity or like work on longevity, have that kind of like image in mind and then work back towards it. And we can just finish off on this, and you can tell me what you think about it. And this touches on a lot of things we've already talked about, but I think my number one most important thing, which is almost like the base for all the pillars to go stack on top of, I think breathing practice is very important. Um, making sure that your breathing is efficient enough at helping with like optimizing oxygen intake, uh, whether that be for a bunch of things. That could be stress reduction, that could be working on your like mindfulness aspect of it. It could even be for improving athletic performance. But this, I think, breathing and practicing breathing is the one movement that can have the biggest impact on the rest of your health if you just do that one movement consistently compared to any other movement. And then off of that, then I think then you have like physical activity, your nutrition, the environment you're in, your mental health, which I combined with like the social connections that you have in your life. And then lastly, what you do for your recovery. I think if you kind of focus on those, what is it, like six things, um, and pick out each one of them is a huge topic of its own. So you know you have to pick and choose certain things from within them that are really important to you, and then with that you can build that image that we were talking about of what your goal is, you know, in 10 years, 20 years, 3 years, when you're an 80 or 90-year-old, and how to work back towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think all those things are great. I always would, yeah, I would think that, obviously relative to who you would talk to, like in what particular order would those things go. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where some of the differences, maybe in opinion might be, as opposed to like if any one of those things are important or not. I think most people would agree that all those things are. Um, and so that's why I go back to like the idea of like stress management. It's from a mental capacity, from some mental, physical, spiritual, like all these parts is like to be to be able to reach your optimal state, whatever that might be for you. It's like you need enough stress to elicit that
Mm-hmm.
response and be able to recover and adapt to that, and just applying that to each individual in whatever aspects of life they're trying to work. um, even doing something like this, right? The idea and concept of doing like public speaking,
Mm-hmm.
um, like there's stages to working on it. There's a process. You can't just throw somebody out off the deep end and have them performing in the stadium. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's just not gonna work. So yeah, I think it's very much so in any aspect of life, in any profession. If you want to become a master at your craft, like there's this idea of like, yeah, managing expectations, stress management, incorporating all these things that you just mentioned. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's this idea of like balance is interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think most people think about balance as far as like there's this imaginary linear line that everything has to be balanced around.
Mm-hmm.
And so they try to balance every single day with every aspect of their life, like as far as like their relationships, work, and everything. And
Mm-hmm.
then they end up kind of driving themselves crazy. Um,
Mm-hmm. It's
it
like a little bit of everything each day doesn't really add up. It's like you could focus on one thing
doesn't,
here, one thing there, and
yeah.
then kind of build the balance that way. But if you try to do everything all at once, it's not going to work.
And you're not going to improve very much.
Mm-hmm.
So if you actually think about it with regards to like physical fitness, you can't do everything at once, right? Typically, you're going to have like phases and cycles, and um, you're going to see how that fits into your greater long-term like goals for like the year or 5 years. But you might have a 3 month like strength phase, you might have a 3 month, I don't know, flexibility phase or whatever. Um, I think in life as well, is like that's actually how we find better balance, is finding ways to like adjust our plan to fit what's necessary, but having these kind of phased out, um, yeah, cycles is really quite important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. You gotta make a plan, an overarching plan, and the steps leading up to that plan. You know, it's like there's going to be different steps, right? Like first, like say when you're baking a cake, like first you mix the ingredients, then you put it in the oven to bake. Like those are two completely different things, right? Like you can't do it all at once, and so it make you got to focus on certain things that are precursors for the later things, right? You can't do the later things that don't have if you don't have the precursors. So,
Yeah.
mhm, very cool. All right, thank you so much. Maybe one final question to finish off. This is a bit of a fun one that I want to have. Is there
Sure.
something you can think of with regards to health and fitness, longevity, anything that we've talked about that you've changed your mind on recently? It could be in the last 6 months, year. Like, what did you used to think was one way and now you've kind of softened your position or maybe even gone completely the opposite way? I can give you an example if you're
Um,
still thinking. Are you still thinking of
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Okay, my example is I've been training for my half marathon, which is coming up on October 15th. And prior to this, when I would run, in terms of the running technique, I would always think that it's best to always be on the ball of your foot and never heel strike. Because I just thought, oh, you want to use your Achilles tendon as like this way of kind of bouncing yourself, kind of doing like single leg bounding. And kind of I've changed my mind on that to say now that I think it makes sense to adjust your running technique uh, based on kind of the situation you're in. Sometimes it makes sense to heel strike, and sometimes it makes sense to be on your forefoot. It just depends on the situation and kind of what you're trying to do.
Okay. Um, yeah, I suppose not necessarily like recently, but I do think that like flexibility training is significantly more important than I would have originally thought.
Mm-hmm.
Because I did none when I was, in playing, in younger days and playing football.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not even until like I didn't even really start doing flexibility training until about um, maybe about 7 years ago. Um, I still couldn't touch my toes at that point really, but um,
Wow.
but as I delve deeper and deeper into it, and I look at it through the lens of, I look at training flexibility from a strength, like using strength protocols, and then
Mm-hmm.
training them in the flexibility world. Um, yeah, I do find that that tends to be some of the biggest problems that people have. That in combination with joint discomforts and joint issues. It's just so like I had Nirvana Strength, and it's like in that realm, like it was just like a lot of people who were already kind of interested in really high level performers.
Mm-hmm.
But now I've kind of like just more and more I'm getting out into the normal world where I'm dealing with more normal people, and
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's even become a more and more of a bigger issue than even probably bigger than I would have realized. Um,
Yeah, because
so I,
people come to
yeah,
personal trainers and they say my number one goal is to either lose weight or gain muscle mass. No, not very few people are coming to a personal trainer and saying I want better flexibility. But in reality,
yeah,
it's like it's the flexibility that they need because in order to build muscle, like you were saying, like if your back is rounded, you can't really do really good squats with heavy weight to be able to build muscle on your legs. So in
yeah,
order to do the things you want to do, you need flexibility. Flexibility is just range of motion. If you don't have range of motion, then you can't get strong in that in that range. That's
yeah.
as simple as that.
Yeah, yeah. No, this is perfectly correct. I think, and I think, yeah, fitness professionals should, yeah, think about ways of incorporating some level of like flexibility training into their programming because, again, like you said, it's like we were talking about having a chronically like flex spine. It's if you're not able to figure out a way to help them gain greater thoracic extension, it's like they can't perform the movements properly.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah, I think that even our conversations and like I think everything that we talked about today, it's very kind of like anti-system. Like there's a general perspective of like the fitness system, health world where everybody's supposed to kind of go down the same path. Um,
Mm-hmm.
as I like the concept of like the matrix, right? It's like escaping the system.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's actually like with doing these kind of like podcasts and educational things, it's actually trying to go back into the system and trying to get people to understand like a different state of mind
Mm-hmm.
with regards to their health that kind of helps them break from what is the normal expectations of the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you just kind of do the most like mainstream kind of search for what like fitness workout you should do, you're gonna get like squat,
Yeah,
bench, deadlift, and it's great. Those are fun ways to train and get stronger, but it's just not for everybody. So it's important to consider all the like when it comes to physical activity, there's just so many qualities that you can train, right? You can get stronger,
Yeah.
faster, more flexible, better endurance. You got aerobic, anaerobic capacity. What else you got? Like I wrote down a few of them. Like it's like there's no end to the things. Your agility, your power, your body composition, reaction time. Like so you can find something that you're interested in at improving and you can find some
Yeah.
sort of activity that incorporates that is interesting and fun to you. So yeah, it's important to find that and then realize that in order to be able to do that for a long time, you need to have the body, capacity. And that comes through, like we said, the range of motion, through the flexibility, but also the tissue integrity, the soft tissue especially. That
Mm.
takes a long time to develop, and it comes through that awareness that we talked about.
Yeah, 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 for sure, for sure.
Any final thoughts before we finish the podcast?
Um, yeah, I think, I would encourage people to, obviously I would say hire a coach, no matter, even like, understanding there's your side as a coach and there's your side as an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
I get to the point where, I'm coaching a lot of like people and helping them with their programming and their training. And I end up kind of like leaving my athlete side for the end. So I get tired of training myself. I even find it very beneficial for even for myself to hire coaches that I trust to program for me, and I send them videos of what I do and get their feedback. And so I think constantly understanding that it's good to get observational feedback from people that you respect,
Mm-hmm.
to get different kinds of programming from different kinds of people, and explore these different areas of movement, and just constantly keep up the learning process and know that you're always going to be a student of the self, because as you progress, because nobody has um, nobody has experience in aging. Like you only do it one time, so it's like as much as you can get information from other people, it's like you're not actually experiencing until you go through it. And
Mm-hmm.
you as an individual are going to be constantly figuring out what all of the information that you're taking in actually applies to you and works with you the best.
Mm-hmm.
So you're always going to be a student of the self.
Mm-hmm.
um, and as you kind of explore things as you move forward, um, obviously incorporate all the components that you had talked about, being able to rest and recover properly, um, among the other things.
Mm-hmm.
Longevity is not just food and fitness. It's, what are the social circles you're in, what's your
Mm-hmm.
environment, like those things are also
Mm-hmm.
very important. So, um, yeah, find things to focus on and find a better way to balance in a more systematic way.
Mm-hmm. Very cool, man. I love that. Yeah, I love what you said. Stay a student of the self, but also I think, like you said, getting a coach it's such an important relationship, that student teacher relationship, especially like when you find someone that you really connect with, that you really respect, that has all this knowledge and information that could be beneficial to you, and just like taking the time through this relationship to extract that and incorporate that into yourself. It's one of the things that I think makes life great. So not participating in that is doing yourself a disservice. So thanks for
Yeah,
for those final words.
all
Great, man.
good.
This has been a great podcast. Thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah,
state of health. And yeah, if you ever want to come back on and discuss other things related to health and fitness, always welcome to.
appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, if people want to find me, they can look on Instagram, on just look for my name, Stoic Mobility. Also, stoicmobility.com. I have a website up with some information and free resources there as well.
Is that where people can sign up for your workshops?
They can, yeah, find out more information about the workshops there either through Instagram or the website. So I have a lot of workshops coming up, and some online programming stuff as well.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing all that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening till the end of the podcast. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, please reach out through social media at jmartfit on Twitter and Instagram, or send an email to jmartfit@substack.com. Have a good week, and till next time.